Hello everyone. Well, it's time for another trial video as we've managed to get a global first clear once again on the first difficulty of the 12th trial in the game, the Hunt for Rampaging Beasts. Now, this is the first trial we've had that actually has two difficulty levels, which is quite interesting. And the first difficulty is what we cleared. The second difficulty we are in the process of attempting to clear. So we'll be going over the first fight, which is the risk difficulty, and the approach, like as always, we'll go over the mechanics, try to understand everything, and then take a look at the actual fight and see how it plays out. Now, this is a pretty chaotic fight, I will warn you in advance, so it is quite hard to keep track of everything happening, but once you understand and break it down, it is pretty much more manageable than it might initially seem, since it does initially appear to be a complete chaotic cluster of a fight. So let's start by taking a look at the skills and seeing how best to deal with them. So this boss does have an intimidating amount of skills, but when you break it all down, you will realize that it's all somewhat broken down into different responsibilities for your DPS or your tank and healer. So you will see here as well, we have all these additional mobs. The thing you have to understand, this is a fight that has 3 bosses. There's 3 boss targets, and you can target either the Wyvern boss dragon, the Wolf boss, or the Boar boss. Now the way to approach this fight is you're going to want to kill the Wolf boss first, then the Boar boss second, and then finally the Wyvern boss. So these 2 sets here, the minions are summoned by the wolf and boss respectively, and you have to deal with them when they show up. So how this fight works is, let's first take a look at the abilities here that are used by the main boss, the dragon. So first up we have Fire Breathing, which you can see has a damage resist tag. After reciting, continuously spew at all targets, dealing a large amount of damage. So this ability is something that there's nothing you can really do to avoid it, as there's no interrupt or anything, but what you do as a healer, you should use your barrier for the fire breathing, because it does do quite a lot of damage otherwise. So this is an ability that the healer should be watching out for, the fire breathing, and then use their barrier for this, because otherwise it will deal a huge amount of damage. So next up we have 2 skills in a row that have this wonderful button here, the interrupt tag, which means that the responsibility for this fight is DPS need to interrupt this. Now this fight does have a lot of interrupts, and rather than worry about who's going to interrupt what ability, the easiest way by far to approach this, and yes, both of your DPS will have to run interrupt. You can't have one DPS interrupting and your tank can't interrupt either, because your tank needs his defensive cooldowns. You're going to have to run 2 interrupts, 1 on each of your DPS, and then the best way to approach it is the boss uses the skills in a particular order. DPS number 1, take the first interrupt, the second DPS take the second interrupt, then the first DPS takes the third interrupt, and so on and so forth, and that's how you approach the fight. It just trivializes the whole concern of, oh, am I interrupting Blinding Mist, or am I interrupting Frenzied Storm, or interrupting Herd Call? It doesn't matter. Just go in order. DPS 1 takes the first interrupt, second takes the second interrupt, and just cycle back and forth whenever you see the interrupt bar. That way you don't need to even worry about it as a DPS, because anytime you see the interrupt bar, you need to interrupt it. Otherwise it'll wipe the party. Simple as that. That's all you need to know. But anyway, Blinding Mist. Summon a sandstorm to sweep across the battlefield, continuously dealing damage to hostile targets and inflicting blind, reducing the basic attack accuracy, and have increased evasion for all allies. This is like a channel. So basically this sucks. This really sucks. You don't want this. So anytime you see this, you interrupt. The same for Frenzied Storm. Like, the reason why I'm not going too deep in these, because it doesn't matter what the ability does, you're going to interrupt it. If you miss the interrupt, you will die. So don't worry about what the ability does. If you miss the interrupt, you will die. So just interrupt it. But the second ability, Frenzied Storm, summon a firestorm to sweep across the battlefield, continuously dealing damage to all hostile targets and greatly increasing the attack and attack speed of allies within range for 5 seconds. This is very, very bad, Frenzied Storm. So Frenzied Storm is one of those skills you're going to have to interrupt basically as soon as the boss casts it, because even if you let 1 or 2 seconds of this tick before interrupting it, it will deal massive damage and potentially wipe you. So when you see Frenzied Storm, That's your cue to be ready to interrupt as soon as you see the interrupt bar show up. Sometimes you can even sort of predict it a little bit with ping and have it hit as soon as the bar shows up, but that's a little risky, and that's definitely a pro move there if you try to interrupt it as soon as the bar shows up with pre-casting interrupt slightly by about a quarter of a second or something like that. So very important, interrupts, cycle your interrupts between the DPS. Next up we have Meteor Shower. Meteor Shower is the type of ability like we've seen in previous bosses where the boss puts a shield on themselves and you have to break the shield in time, otherwise the party gets wiped. This is a Meteor Shower. It deals massive damage to all hostile targets, but if broken, enter a stun state. So if you don't manage, you have to basically target swap to the boss to deal damage to the boss to break the shield, otherwise it will wipe the party. So that's how this Meteor Shower works. Now next up you have Herd Call Bite. This is a very high damage ability, and it is the first ability that hires two responsibilities here, because the tank, this is a single target on the tank, which the tank is going to have to immediately, they're going to have to shield this damage, and the healer is then going to have to immediately cleanse them as well with purification, because this puts a huge amount of stacks of decay on the tank, which is very bad for the tank. So the tank has to use shield for this, and then the healer has to use purification to cleanse the tank as soon as this ability hits. Next up we have a Herd Call Charge, which is going to command the boar boss to release a charge skill. Again, this is an interrupt. If you're a DPS, you're going to be cycling your interrupts back and forth and back and forth, so this is another ability that you'll be interrupting. Same with Herd Call Pounce. It orders the wolf boss to release the pounce skill. Again, you're going to just be looking for this as an interrupt. Then you have Herd Call Stomp. Now, Stomp is just going to be, like you said, a damage resist and also requiring a cleanse. So basically, the Stomp is going to also need a shield and a purification from the healer. And then, yeah, so basically this Herd Leader, the way this works is, so like I said, this is a 3-boss fight. You're going to have the dragon, the wolf boss, and the boar boss. And when there's more than 6 normal monsters on the field, because both the wolf and the boar summon adds, they will use... yeah, Wolf Howl and Beast Roar skills will deal massive damage, so you have to kill the adds as soon as they spawn. And whenever the boss is heavily injured or one of the two boars, the boar or the wolf king, dies, the other beast king will enter in a frenzy state, getting into a large increase into attack and attack speed. So you just have to be mindful when you kill one of the bosses, it'll boost the other one, so just be mindful of that. Next up you have Cold-Blooded. When heavily injured or when one of the Beast Kings dies, gain the Cold-Blooded state, increasing attack and attack speed, and gain an additional stack every 180 seconds up to 3 stacks. So this is bad. This is, you know, when you kill one of the first bosses, you basically have a timer here, which is increasing his attack and attack speed every 3 minutes. So if you don't have enough DPS for this fight, you could really start taking a lot of damage as it goes on. Then you have Adventurous Plight, which is a passive effect that increases the damage resist of all monsters and reduces the recovery amount of all adventurers over time. So this is very much a DPS race fight with interrupts and the healer and tank using shield and barrier and purification and heals accordingly, but there's a lot of responsibility on the DPS here to get those interrupts out. Now, the rest of the abilities, to be honest, you don't really need to know too much about. The order of the fight is Wolf Boss dies first, followed by Boar Boss, followed by the Dragon finally. And when you get to the Dragon is basically going to follow the similar attack pattern without having the additional minions being summoned and the additional abilities that affect the wolf and boar boss. So it does become a much more manageable fight after that. Now, it is a bit chaotic. It does sound like there's a lot going on, but when I show the fight, which we're going to transition to now, you'll all see that it is actually pretty self-explanatory and all makes sense. So let's take a look at the fight and take a look at how we approached this dragon here. So bear with me. I will switch to that now. All right, and let's jump in and take a look. So we start the fight immediately. You can see here you have 3 targets above each of the heads. You have the wolf boss, which I'm currently targeted. You have the boar boss, which has another target. And then you have the dragon, which also has a target. So you have to be mindful that you need to make sure you've clicked onto the right target, which at the start of the fight should be the wolf boss. because the wolf has to die first. You can see as well that we have Awakening not auto-casting because we're saving Awakening for certain high DPS requirements throughout the fight. In my case, I'm saving it for the second time the bosses spawn ads because it's a big DPS check, and again you can save it as well for when the boss casts the meteor shower, which has a shield which is also required. So I'll show those moments when they come up. So it is quite a chaotic fight because you have these 3 targets, but we keep targeting the wolf, and then we're gonna have, I think, the first interrupt coming up soon. So here, this charge up you see here, he's gonna cast this first, and you can see here, I'm gonna go back. So he charges up for a bit and then casts Frenzied Storm. And you can see I try to interrupt that as soon as possible. So the second I see the cast bar, and you can see how much damage in that tiny little window. Look at this. In that tiny little window, look how much damage went out. Like, this is a huge amount of damage. So you have to interrupt that really, really, really quickly. Fire breathing is coming. Healer uses barrier. Second interrupt, so this was Natasha's interrupt, she got that, and now the next interrupt will be mine. When it comes here, boom, interrupt, there you go. So we're cycling, as DPS, we're cycling interrupts. And you can see I had popped my Awakening when the second round of ads spawned. The first boss is down, now we're on the boar boss. And now we have to be mindful, now that one boss has died, the main dragon can cast Meteor Shower. So here comes another. This is going to be Natasha to interrupt. You can see we took a lot of damage here because there was a bit of lag and it took a while to interrupt. You can see just how much damage. So now Meteor Shower, we swap to the boss and we have to defeat the shield before just enough. Okay, we got it. Perfect. And then swap back to the boar boss. We're still trying to kill the boar boss before swapping full time to the dragon. There's my interrupt. And you can see here, I don't even care what ability the boss is using. The second I see the blue interrupt bar, I interrupt. And then the second time it's Natasha's interrupt, and then me, and then mine again, etc. So I don't care what ability the boss is casting. I'm just knowing that when an interrupt bar shows up, it's either my responsibility or it's Natasha's responsibility. In this case, it was hers. The next one is going to be mine. So now the boar boss is down, and we are fighting the boss, the main boss. Now the fight actually gets a lot easier once you kill both the wolf and the boar, because the boss is just going to cycle through his main abilities, which are easy to avoid. You just do damage to break the shield, interrupt whenever you see an interrupt, and use your shield and barrier for the same abilities required them previously. And you just keep on fighting through the boss as his HP gets lower and lower and lower, and he just keeps cycling through the same abilities that no longer summon any additional adds and no longer have the abilities that are related to the boar boss and the wolf boss. And that's basically the rest of the fight. As you can see here, he's going to do a double storm here, but we have both the DPS ready for interrupts, myself and Natasha. 39%, we're going down, and you can see the boss is way easier once he no longer has the wolf and boar with him. And we're coming down, coming down, coming down. Fire breathing again. You can see the barrier. You can now that there's less chaos, you can actually see the healer cast barrier for the fire breathing. Here comes another Frenzied Storm. Interrupted right away. The next interrupt's going to be mine, so whatever shows up, I'm going to interrupt that. First, we have a shield to deal with, which is fine. You can see here, I actually forgot. I didn't forget, but I was holding off on my Awakening just in case there was any other reason to hold it off. But when we reached like the 15%, I said, you know what, I'm just going to pop my Awakening now. And then, boom, we got it down and beat it. So there you have it. We managed to beat the boss. That was the global first clear. And I'm just going to skip ahead so we see the text there. There it is, confirming that we were the first party. And that's it. That's how you approach this fight. The key here, like I said, is as long as your tank and healer are using their shield and barrier and purification in the appropriate moments, then the responsibility is on the DPS. The responsibility is on the DPS to cycle your interrupts between player 1, player 2, player 1, player 2, player 1, player 2, so you always have your interrupt off cooldown and you're able to do that. So there you have it. That's how you approach the risk difficulty, and the crisis difficulty, just to point out, is going to be the same mechanics, just more HP, more damage requirement, more damage going out. So you don't need to worry about the mechanics of crisis. It's the same as risk, just more and stronger and harder. So there you have it. Hopefully you found this useful when you get to your own clears for this fight, and best of luck. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments down below. Hit that like button if you liked the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you know when the next one will be uploaded. And join the Discord as well. Look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.